Welcome back, everyone. So, to start off today, we're going to jump right in. And this is one of the stories I hope you all read both 21 and 22. I tried to keep the story together per usual, but the beginning of 21 is actually something that it has an odd amount of significance in the Christian tradition. So, I'm going to assign a few extra verses that I didn't, that we're just going to look up real quick to give ourselves a little bit more context, to get ourselves going with why David going to a priest and eating bread is kind of a big deal, but also how it influences Jesus's ministry, because this is one of the random stories of David that pops up. So, in order to do this, I have four verses that I was going to assign for people to look up, and then we can jump around. So if someone is willing, can someone look up Exodus 19? Who's B? Are you able to?
I can do that.
All right, Larry, can you look up Exodus 25?
25, yes.
25. All right, I need one other volunteer.
Exodus.
All right, Sue, can you look up Leviticus 24?
Mm-hmm.
And then one last one. We need someone to look up the Gospel of Matthew. Is there anyone else with a thumb available? All right, Helen, I need you to look up Matthew 12. Oh, that one's Luke. Okay.
Larry, you have a very well-used looking Bible. Your
Larry.
Bible looks very well
Well,
used.
that's because I'm so well read. Mainly it's because it's a paperback.
All right. So, Exodus 19, who had the 19?
I do.
You do. Okay, cool. Thank you. Could you read for us, let's see, how much? Exodus 19, starting in verse. Oh, this slices the verse. If after verse 9, there should be a subtitle that says something like the people are consecrated.
Well, I don't have it, but there's a
Okay.
break there.
So just start in verse 10 then. Verse 19, 10, and read through 13. So 10, 11, 12, and 13.
Okay. When Moses told the words of the people to the Lord said to Moses, "Go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their garments and be ready for the third day. For on the third day the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people."
Mhm.
More,
Keep going, two more verses.
okay. And you shall set limits for the people all around, saying, "Take care not to go up into the mountain or touch the edge of it. Whoever touches the mountain shall be put to death. No hand shall touch him, but he shall be stoned or shot, whether beast or man, he shall not live. When the trumpet sounds a long blast, they shall come up to the mountain."
All right. I'm gonna skip ahead a little bit and read the final verse. So this, if you for those who are with us in Exodus, this is right before the people are gonna make their covenant with God. We have God, Moses and God have been talking on the mountain. Moses is coming down. God's about to come down, and they're gonna make their promises. In verse 15, so they're told to wash their clothes, get yourself consecrated and ready. And then in verse 15, it continues and says, he said to the people, prepare for the third day, do not go near a woman. So this is the instructions of how to be consecrated, how to be holy, wash your clothes, get yourself ready. And no getting no marital relations with women, which is specified in 15, and that's just one of the things that you don't do in order to be holy enough to be in God's presence. So stick a pin in that in our minds because that's going to come up. Flip over who had Exodus 25.
I do.
All right. Can you read for us Exodus 25 starting in verse 23?
Okay. You shall make a table of acacia wood, 2 cubits long, 1 cubit wide, and 1.5 cubits high. You shall overlay it with pure gold and make a molding of gold around it. You shall make around it a rim of a handbreadth wide and a molding of gold around the rim. You shall make for it 4 rings of gold and fastens the rings to the 4 corners and its 4 legs. The rings shall hold the poles used for carrying the table shall be close to the rim. You shall make the poles of acacia wood and overlay them with gold, and the table shall be carried with these. You shall make its plates and dishes for incense, and its flagons and bowls with which to pour drink offerings. You shall make them of pure gold, and you shall set the bread of the presence on the table before me always.
All right. So this, for once again, for those who journeyed through Exodus, with our Bible study, you remember all the nooks and crannies of all the details of the wood and the gold and the overlay, and it was not too fun to read. This is why this is important to remember is that last line. Once again, we're reading sections and picking out the last line. The bread of the presence is on the table. This is a loaf of bread that is to remind the people of God journeying with them through the wilderness. So this is both a reminder of the Passover, of the manna in the wilderness, but there is always to be fresh bread on the table. So details are important here. All right, next one. Who had Leviticus?
I do.
All right.
Where do you want me to start?
Verse 5.
Verse 5, you shall take choice flour and bake 12 loaves of it. 2/10 of an ephah shall be in each loaf. What is ephah?
It's a unit of measurement.
Okay, you shall place them in 2 rows, 6 to a row on a table of pure gold. You shall put frankincense with each row to be a token offering for the bread as an offering by fire to the Lord. Every Sabbath day, Aaron shall set them in order before the Lord regularly as a commitment to the people of Israel, as a covenant forever. They shall be for Aaron and his descendants, who shall eat them in the holy place, for they are most holy portion for him from the offerings by fire to the Lord, a perpetual due. The man who is, that's a different.
That's enough. You're good.
But it also talks about what happens when somebody doesn't do the right thing and they get stoned to death. So
yeah, so once again, stoning is the result if you don't follow these.
Yeah, it's pretty severe. I assume that this is, I don't remember exactly when God started taking up residence in a tent. Was that quite some time before? I can't.
So, it is at the end of Exodus where they have another ceremony where they all have to consecrate themselves and stay away from women, and God then resides basically on the Ark of the Covenant.
Right.
So this is the instructions for the priest. And so we read that there are 12 loaves of bread on the table that are made once a week. But they're supposed to be for the priest to eat. This is like the priestly food. This is how you feed them. And so you have the offerings of like the animal sacrifice offerings where the fat gets burnt off and the fat's God's portion. The priests get the next portion, and then the people get the rest of the offering. So it's like your priestly butcher, but also your way to feed the priest. This is the other way. So priests didn't just eat meat. So they got bread too, but the bread had to sit out for a while because that's their offering to God. And then the holy ones, get to eat it.
Mhm.
All right, Helen, we're going to hold on to the verse in Matthew for a little bit because I want us to, we're going to see it, how it wraps around to that story in Matthew. But yeah, Larry?
Is that the bread of the presence?
Yes, it is.
Those 12 loaves?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So all of that was just to understand the bread of the presence and what David's asking for.
Okay.
So, starting in verse 21 of our actual section today, David, as we read last time, he is on the run. King Saul's trying to kill him. Now, his best friend Jonathan knows that King Saul, his dad, is trying to kill him, and he was kind of just told to go. The thing that I have a question about, and the text seems to give some hints at, but is unclear, is David himself just like a lone person on the run? There seems to be indications that that is not true, that he's not just one dude running about. Because at least my notes are saying the conversation that's about to ensue, it's not just David, it seems to be David and his men. So it sounds like when David left, he's like, okay, troops, you're with me, and he takes his normal entourage with him.
Yeah.
So if you remember at one point, Saul was like, hey, David, he was like trying to kill David, so he sent him to the front lines and put military men underneath him. So now he's just taking part of the army with him on the run, seems to be the implication. So it changes the mental image slightly if you know David isn't just a single person on the run, but there's like a group of people. So on the run, he comes to Nob, and the priest Ahimelech. I don't know what the Ahi is in his name, but Melech is king, so his name is related to the king. He seems to be a descendant of Eli, one of the original priests from earlier in the story. That said, Nob is known in other parts of the Bible as the city of priests. So this indicates this is where the tabernacle is set up. This is where all the priests, like all the Levites, all the people doing the priestly cities, he's going to the priestly city, basically, where all the priests are, and he's talking to the head priest when he gets to Nob.
Okay, yes.
So that's a lot of backstory just to get us to the point. When he arrives, the head priest says, why are you here alone, David? Like, what? Where is everyone? So why would the head priest be suspicious of just David showing up? David and his like small entourage. It's not a lot of people, but it is an entourage.
Well, I assume he had a reputation that preceded him, and so that would, you kind of wonder, what are you doing here?
Mm-hmm.
Make you a little bit uncomfortable, maybe.
But it seems like he's a fugitive. He's, that he's running from something. So something has changed in David's status.
Mm-hmm.
Before that he was
Mm-hmm.
seen as the heir.
So there's this, we will see this in a later conversation. David's status, yes, has changed, but it doesn't seem to be public knowledge that King Saul doesn't like David. At this point, everyone just knows David from his infamy with Goliath. He's been doing military campaigns and being very successful, and he seems to be Saul's right-hand guy. So there is question. It's odd that he would just show up,
Yeah.
But no one really knows that Saul's trying to kill him at this point.
No, I realize that, but he
Yeah.
just wonders why he's alone when he wouldn't expect it.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently he showed up without his armament, or you would expect that as you envisioned him, he just showed up as a guy without his military gear.
Mm-hmm.
It sort of implies he showed up alone.
Yeah, it does.
This is why I am a little bit confused, because David implies he has an entourage, but it also sounds like he doesn't.
Yeah.
So the text is unclear.
It sounds to me like it's two different things, because then on verse 10, David rose and fled that day from Saul and went to the king Ashish of Gath, and that's like it's like the story starts over.
Yeah. It's a
Yes.
crazy story.
Yeah.
My text says that the section where he goes to King Ashish is likely a story insert.
Yeah.
So that's one that may be plopped in for other reasons down the line, that they needed this to exist somewhere to precede another story that's going to happen.
Right.
So once again, we have a composite text that has many stories of David that they're trying to stitch together. So whether or not David actually has an entourage, that's a question left up. But he explains that, oh, I'm actually on a super secret mission from the king, and I can tell you nothing about my super secret mission. But it was so super secret that I had to leave in the dead of night. I didn't have time to prepare. So what do you have? Helping me is helping the king. And so that's like kind of the implication of like, yes, I know I look weird, but it's because the king sent me out with haste. Can you help me?
Mm-hmm.
So this is a bold-faced lie. Like David just outright lies to this guy. He's not like, I'm on the run, please help me. He's like, no, I'm on a secret mission. What do we think? Is it right for David? If you're running for your life, is it okay to lie? Or is this just David being a little bit slimy?
Well, it's kind of interesting in how rules are getting bent all the time. David is good at bending rules, but he's kind of it's sort of pragmatic. He's thinking, well, if I want to survive, I better lie about this. I mean,
yeah, this is his life on the line, and he knows it.
The secret mission is he's avoiding death.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So all is fair when you're trying to just save your own hide?
Sure.
Yes. Yep.
Or someone else's hide.
Yeah.
Well, at this point, it doesn't seem like he's hurting anybody by lying. It seems that way.
So this is if you read later on in the story, there are very, very dramatic consequences to this. Yeah, Clay?
Well, I'm trying to catch up with this.
Yeah.
I have listened to 18 and part of 19 and part of 20, but you just mentioned that he still has the reputation of having beaten Goliath. So if that's what people are still remembering and don't know anything else that's happening, he can get away with saying all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't seem like he's lying or anything. It seems like that would be normal, that he's going on something for the king. So I don't know if I'm right about that, thinking about it that way.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah,
If you can't get caught, then it's okay to lie.
Yeah. No one knows what's going on.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. His rules are different. Okay.
So here's another way to think about it. Just flipping the script a little bit. If he is lying, that means culpability's on him.
Yeah.
where if he tells the truth, then he's putting the priest in a hard position, because then if he tells the truth of like, hey, I'm on the run, please help me, then the priests are more culpable for hiding him. So in a way, lying is a way to protect the people. Theoretically, it doesn't end up working out, but it is protecting the people because they don't know to inform the king of this, because by their knowledge, it's on the up and up.
Mm-hmm.
So the priest says that, okay, like, I don't have any normal food because, like, this is the city of priests. Like, we have all the ritual food. Like, we have the bread of presence. Evidently, there's only a few. I don't think they give them the entire bread of presence, but there is at least 5 loaves that he's like, hey, we have these 5 loaves, but you need to be ritually pure in order to eat them. So, like, have you kept away from women are you consecrated, kept away from women for at least 3 days? And that goes back to that initial Exodus verse that we read of, like, kind of the rules for consecrating yourself. Have you washed? Have you stayed away from women? Are you ritually pure? Because theoretically, if they're not, we have seen people be burned alive for less by the presence of God. And this is a city where God is thought to be residing. So there are some dire consequences if they're not. And David says, oh, yeah, no, when we're on a mission, me and my men, we stay away from women. That's okay. We don't know if he's lying again or not. David's just desperate. So what do we think about this, of him being like, oh, yeah, no, sure, we're good? Is it just desperate people do desperate things?
Well, and he continues on with that, starting verse 12 to the end of the chapter, where he pretends that he is insane. Makes marks on the doors of the gate. He lets his spit roll down on his beard.
Yeah, David's willing to do anything at this point, it sounds like.
Behaves like a madman.
Yeah. So this is where, Helen, you were the one that had the verse in Matthew, right?
Yes.
All right. So could you read for us Matthew 12, 1 through 8?
Question's not there, right?
Okay. Of how much more value is a man than a sheep? So it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. Then he said to the man, stretch out your hand.
Hold on.
Is this the right part?
Start in verse 1. I think you started a little bit later on.
Okay, verse 1. Okay.
Yeah.
At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry, and they began to pluck heads of grain and to eat. But when the Pharisees saw it, they said to him, look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath. And he said to them, have you not read what David did when he was hungry and those who were with him? How he entered the house of God and ate the bread of the presence, which it was not lawful for him to eat, nor for those who were with him, but only for the priests. Or have you not read in the law how on the Sabbath the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are guiltless? I tell you, something greater than the temple is here. And if you had known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless, for the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath.
All right, thank you. That's enough for now. So here's a verse that I'm gonna guess you've maybe heard before. And did you have any idea of the story of David that they were talking about? So at least Jesus's interpretation implies that David did have a company of men with him at this point in time. It may be a misinterpretation, who knows? But Jesus is outright saying, yeah, it's not lawful to do what David did, but he did it anyways. But
would it have been lawful for David to eat the bread, but it was his men that was the issue?
technically, no, David wasn't supposed to eat it either because it was only lawful for the priest to eat it. And as Sue pointed out, the consequence is supposed to be getting stoned.
Okay.
So, like, even though David is like, says that he's holy enough and consecrated enough to eat it, he's still not supposed to do this. And so this is a teaching that I think is an important one. The Sabbath was made for humans, not humans for the Sabbath, meaning, or the common interpretation means the Sabbath is a gift for rest. It, like, humans are not made to view it as like a burden that we are shaped in order to enforce the Sabbath upon the world. No, this is supposed to be a gift. And so viewing some of the rules that are in the other parts of our scriptures is similar things. These are supposed to be guidance to help us live rather than just like taskmasters that we have to obey there's times to break them. And evidently this story that we are reading is a time that evidently it is acceptable to break the rules. So that's at least the gospel interpretation of this story. But our story continues. So let me pause there. Any thoughts on that?
Well, it does appear that David believes that lying for a good purpose is okay. I mean, he's not terribly worried about that.
David doesn't necessarily have upstanding morals. So yeah, he's willing to lie. Whether he considers it good or not is a different thing.
But the priest should know better.
So here's the argument that the priest valued mercy over the rules.
Yeah. Which is good.
It seems like some of the customs of the Jews at one time anyway were rather strict about Sabbath. I'm remembering a story I read how they couldn't light any candles, they couldn't turn any lights on, they couldn't light their stoves. And I mean, it sounds like for them that the Sabbath was not for men, it was meant for the Sabbath.
That's Old Testament, yeah.
So this is one where the strict adherence to not just the rules, but we've talked before about like building a fence around the Torah. That specifically became a very big topic of concern after the people returned from exile. So after the war with Babylon, they were hauled off to Babylon and then were allowed to return. One of the theological reasons that we read about in text of why this happened, this great tragedy, was because they didn't follow the rules in scripture closely enough. And so there are certain sects of Judaism today that try to follow them very strictly. And then there's other parts of the Jewish world that don't. So our friends at Congregation Shir Tikva, they're not the ones that they're part of the Reformed Jewish tradition, which they do follow the rules, but they also see much more lenience in them than like you would think of with like the Hasidic tradition with the hats and the locks. They have different understandings. So there's a great diversity of that, but that comes specifically post-exile, that conversation. So here, things are a lot more flexible than at other points in history. So at any rate, the priest gives him the bread. And not only that, he gives him the sword of Goliath the Philistine, which is a big and expensive sword. As we talked about, like Goliath had a lot of really fancy armor on him. And for some reason, this is being kept in the holy place, almost like a trophy. And like, yeah, there's no sword like Goliath's. And so David's like, yeah, I'll learn to swing that thing. So David also now has a legendary sword with him. Yeah, Larry?
wouldn't it have been a little big for David? I mean, they talked about how big, how much Goliath's shield weighed. He must have had one great big sword, and it would
Right.
be, I would think, too big for an ordinary sort of size person like David was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's probably one of the reasons why David didn't take it originally, because remember, he was quite young when he killed Goliath, and he was like a little pipsqueak with very little military training, like the armor fell off of him. So they kept Goliath's stuff, like I said, likely as a trophy. But now David is not only an adult, he's also an accomplished warrior, so he is more able to hold this. So it may just be for status, though. It's a question of whether or not David can swing the sword, but it's one of those of like, he wants a status symbol with him. He wants, even if he doesn't have to prove he can swing it, if he goes riding into town with a huge sword, it looks like he can swing it.
Okay.
So he gets
all right.
the legendary sword that he earned it in a way. He has bread to continue on the journey, but notably he doesn't stick around long because Doeg the Edomite sees him. Now my text translates him as being the chief of Saul's shepherds, which the text down below said this is a weird phrase. They probably mean he's captain of the guard. So he has Doeg the Edomite is notably, he's not an Israelite. He is from Edom, which means he's a mercenary, but he seems to be a mercenary with a high rank in the army.
Okay.
They don't know what it means that he is detained before the Lord. This is also a one-off phrase that their translators are like, we don't know what it means to be detained before the Lord. Is he in some kind of like ritual practice where they have him locked away somewhere? We don't know. So he is not able to act on things at the moment, but this is someone that David does not want to see or get stuck around. And we'll see why later. At any rate, he continues on from there. So what do we think of this first episode? All right. So next, we have him fleeing to King Ashish of Gath. And this, I believe King Ashish is part of the Philistines.
Mhm.
At any rate, so he rolls up to town, and this guy knows who he is, or like the soldiers who initially see him. And they're kind of afraid of him, but David's also kind of afraid of them. So his idea is, I'm gonna act like a madman. I'm just gonna froth at the mouth and roll on the ground. Notably, he rolls up to town with Goliath's sword to the people who probably would recognize Goliath's sword. And anyways, at first they're like, hey, we're gonna bring David as a trophy to the king, and then David's like rolling on the ground being all crazy, and the king's like, why do I need a crazy person? Like, no. And sends him on. So the crazy act worked, at least, to get released from the enemy here. That said, remember this name because this character comes back around. That's why they think this sounds like a story that was plucked out somewhere else and set here, because this character comes back into play. And so this is kind of a character introduction to King Ashish of Gath.
You know, Chris, I have a question here that goes back a little bit.
Yeah, what's up?
In my version, it talks about all of these people prophesying, and the Spirit of God came upon Saul, I think. I'm looking at the end of chapter 19.
Okay.
What does that mean? He too prophesied before Samuel and lay naked all that day and all that night.
Mhm.
I mean, it seems to be a tradition or
Yeah. So, yeah, this is one where there is a strong tradition in the text that when God like descends on a human to like give them few like prophesying, whether it's predictions in the far future or the near future or just communicating with God, makes people mad in a way, like gives them a bout of insanity where they're like tearing off their clothes, they're rolling on the ground, they're singing, they're dancing. Um, we talked about this a few weeks ago where there may be substances at play that give this kind of reaction, this kind of out of body interaction. But nevertheless, that's actually a good way to understand what's happening there is that kind of otherworldly feeling is associated with God. So there's something happening around Samuel that kind of gives this insane reaction and prophesying. Frankly, people sound like they're speaking gibberish, probably. But we see this kind of ecstasy tradition pop up in many religions. Like another one that I've seen people talk about is like the Oracle of Delphi in the Greek world. Um, this is another one where they would send a person basically to a hallucinogenic state and she would speak gibberish and they would translate it. Um, Fun one. I've seen some recent things that they do think there's something at play that was causing hallucinations that was in the fissure in the ground that the Oracle of Delphi sat over. It's fascinating. Anyways, so hallucinogenics were well used in the ancient world, and so this may be one of those things at play. So if you think of someone just tripping out on drugs, that gives you a good image of what's going on there.
okay, so it's not prophesying like in a serious kind of way. You're prophesying something that's going to happen or
They were seen as one of the same in the ancient world. So they would some of them you would get the person into this ecstatic state and they would say gibberish and then people would translate what it means. Um,
okay.
so this was just much more acceptable. Anything that got you into a different like mind space, people
Right.
associated it with communing with gods. And so this is we see this cross culturally as a way to understand what God's will is. Are
Okay.
in this tradition and other ones, which is why they think something's going on here.
Mhm.
All right. Let's bring it back to our story for this week though. Um so we get a few episodes of like where David is going in his kind of escape plan. So he goes to a cave. Caves are going to become very important in David's story. The landscape in this region has a lot of naturally forming caves. If you drive around on like a Holy Land tour, people will point out the caves that are just in the cliffside. It's just the type of rock that the land is built out of, hollows out frequently. So there's a lot of hiding spaces, and they're really hard to find which cave someone is hiding in because there's a lot of them. So they're really good hiding spots. Anyway, so his family hears he's hiding in a cave and his brother and his dad find him. But David, in a way, knows that his family's in jeopardy because the king's out to get him. And so he goes to the king of Moab and asks for the king of Moab to keep his family safe. So, and evidently the king of Moab agrees. So this is a neighboring nation to the Israelites. We've already seen the interaction with Moab. If you remember, Ruth and Boaz, Ruth is a Moabite, and she comes back. Theoretically, if you trust the lineage, Ruth is David's like great grandmother. And so he actually has connections with Moab, but it is a neighboring and rival country, or like independent nation, kind of down into the side. And so what do we think about going to the enemy, a rival nation, being like, hey, can you house my family? Can you keep them safe?
Mhm.
I guess he's pretty desperate.
Mhm.
Is it so this is just more signs of David's desperation?
Well, I don't think that's the whole thing. I mean, they're likely to help him because they're enemies of Saul's, right?
Ah, so the enemy of my enemy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
He wouldn't certainly go to an ally of Saul's.
Mm-hmm. So this is where we see David is starting to make relationships with surrounding areas. And this, once again, this is setting up some scenarios that will come back later on. So David is already building up relationships with Moab. And I think it's spot on with the like the enemy of my enemy is my friend. David's kind of using that and having other nations harbor enemies of the state. But he gets word that don't remain in the stronghold being like the caves. We see this phrase come up a lot in the Psalms because Psalms are attributed to David. Leave and go into the land of Judah. So basically, like they know where you are, leave, go somewhere else. And that is true because in the next episode, we hear that Saul gets word that where David is. Specifically, he is hearing this from his informant, Doeg. So Doeg evidently got out of religious confinement and told King Saul. And now Saul is mad because he is mad that, like, wait, none of my people told me David's on the run. All of you were harboring the son of Jesse. None of you told me that my son. He's mad that no one even told him that his son Jonathan was in league with David. So, like, he feels betrayed by everybody. And thus he goes to the priestly area, or wait, does he? No, he sends for the priest, and now he's mad at the priest because he's like, you didn't tell me when David arrived. So, with all of this argument, is Saul being rational? Is he irrational? Being mad at everyone for never telling him David's movements? What do we think of King Saul's reaction here? Is he just angry or I don't know. What do you think?
He is angry.
Yeah. He's already throwing spears at his son, David. You know, he's a sort of an angry man most of the time, it appears.
Mm-hmm.
And he believes in revenge.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Seems to him that the world's against him.
He's a bit paranoid.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, even paranoid people have real enemies. But you know, it's normal that David would try to escape because his life is threatened, and then people who try to help him are enemies, become enemies.
So the difficult thing is Saul has been trying to kill David discreetly. Sent him out to war. Oh no, David didn't die at war. That would have been easy. He's thrown some spears at him. He's like contrived plots. But do you know what he's never done? He's never publicly made David an enemy of the state. And now he's mad when no one else knows that he's an enemy of the state. He's just like, why didn't you read my mind that I don't like David? He seems to me like a child throwing a tantrum.
Yeah.
But that's my read of it. So,
But is there not a possibility that his his mental state has now gone to the point where he's turning against the Lord, and that the priests represent, his core values in life. That's what I was reading, that it's just gone that far. He's going to
Yeah.
slaughter these priests now, and it kind of just goes counter to his whole upbringing and his place in the world. But the other thing always gets me is, isn't God in control of what he does anyway? I don't. This is the conflict I always have.
Well,
Is
there
it,
is this free will thing.
it's
Of course, free will, I don't know if that's part of the Old Testament, but the
Yeah. So Gary, I think your assessment of this, I think that's a great way to interpret this is, so we had Saul's fall from God's graces, where like he did the sacrifice himself, and the I forget the other piece, where he did the two acts that kind of removed him from being God's chosen king. But it's taken until now for some of the effects to really set in. And now it seems, so that was like God turning God's back on Saul, but now it seems like Saul is fully turning his back on God.
yeah,
Being willing to just execute priests, has no concern over any ramifications, what it means to do that, especially in the city of priests. So yeah, that shows a dramatic turn in character, that he prizes loyalty to King Saul over loyalty to God.
Yeah. Well,
That sounds familiar
God
today.
has already told Saul
right.
he's going to take the kingdom away.
Yeah. But Saul doesn't seem, he's been told that, but he's like, God, you can take it away from me, but I'm gonna make it hard for you to do that. Like there's a defiant spirit to it.
Yeah, I'm going down fighting.
Mm-hmm. And fight he does. So notably though, so when Saul asked the priest, like, why didn't you turn David in? The priest was like, hey, like, David's like your top guy.
Yeah.
Why would I notify you? He told me it was a super secret mission. Why? Like, I was theoretically honoring you as king. I was doing my best. Have I inquired for about God for him before? Yeah, come on. This is like I was acting well within what you have told me to do before. I knew nothing of his faults. You did not communicate to me David's downfall. And so we see how David lying actually supposedly could give this guy a level of protection, because he's like, I was doing what I thought was right. I'm sorry that I was wrong. But that excuse is not good enough. So Saul says, okay, kill this guy and everyone around him. And what's notable is his men do not. They say, like, no, we're not killing priests. And so Saul's men disobey him after hearing the consequences. So, like, King Saul is telling his men to execute priests who were doing their job best they could, best they knew how to, and were being told to be executed for that. And his men still say no. That takes a lot of courage in my book. Because there's a very real chance that them saying no will get them killed too. because the priests are getting killed for unknowingly disobeying the king. They are knowingly disobeying the king. At any rate, Saul turns to the mercenary and says, okay, mercenary, you kill the priest. And Doeg, the Edomite, turns and kills everyone and says 85 priests who wore the linen ephod. So that's like they were wearing their priestly garbs. 85 of them were killed that day. And then after that, they killed the women, children, infants, oxen, donkeys, sheep. They killed the whole town. That said, one of the sons of Ahimelech escaped, told David what happened, and David says, stay here, I'll protect you. So, whoa, wait, there's one section I am missing that I did not. Anyways, we have about 10 minutes left. So what do we think of this whole scenario? David on the run, the king being irrational, valuing loyalty above all. What do we think of this whole situation?
Well, David seems like a very pure, even though he lied, it seemed like he's a very pure, wonderful leader, person that's everybody loves, even though he was in deep trouble. The king, he's the evil one. He's going down in a heap somewhere, in everybody's opinion.
Yeah.
At least in the writer's opinion.
I kind of wonder what happened to Samuel. You know, why is he not involved here?
Samuel's really
Saul
old
is
at this
really
point.
acting up.
I don't think he's not dead yet, but Samuel is very old at this point.
Oh, he is. Okay. So
Yeah.
he can't. Okay. Well, it seems to be something that repeats itself in history, wanting revenge, and you know they were still an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, and more than that. You know, if you do, some people just wipe out all of you. They did that all the time.
So an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, if
Is an improvement.
it actually is supposed to set limits.
Yeah,
But Saul does
some
not care.
It was way beyond that. You know, they. I don't know what the punishment should have been. Certainly, saying you made a mistake makes more sense because, you know, I think if nowadays we look at people's motivation, and if it's unintentional, it's a different issue.
But that
if
doesn't
it's
matter.
manslaughter, not murder. So.
But that's not mattering for Saul right now.
Not how Saul operated. No.
What is
really threatened.
Saul's motivation here? What's number one on his list of the things he wants in life?
He wants
self-preservation.
What?
Self-preservation. He's trying to save himself.
Yeah.
And he wants revenge on Jonathan and on David here, particularly on David. You know, that David's making him look like a fool in some ways.
But I think one thing is notable, his opinion is turned on Jonathan too now. So it's no longer even like, I want to save my kingdom so I can pass it on to my son. He's like, screw my son. I'm just going to make this a living hell for everyone.
Yeah.
Which I think that shows a lot of where his mental state is.
Well, and I think it's very hard to understand why Jonathan should have this kind of relationship with David and not want to be in line for the kingship, whatever it's called. He doesn't understand that.
All right, one last thing. We have 5 minutes to go. I don't want to miss this one. I needed a moment to figure out where it was. It's at the beginning of 22. This is also going to set the tone of some of the stories coming up. So we are in the antics side of this story, where David's now on the run. Lots of shenanigans are going to go down. A lot of heartbreak as well. But at the beginning of 22, David escaped from the caves, and it is when his brothers come. But it's not just his brothers coming with him. We see in 22, or 22 verse 2, everyone who was distressed, everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was discontented gathered to him, and he became captain over them. And those who were with him numbered 400.
Mm-hmm.
So David now has men again. He has 400. But tell me what kind of people are gathering around David. like translate what this means. Those who are discontented, those who are in debt, everyone who's unhappy is gathering around David. What kind of people are these?
Well, they're not happy with their king.
No.
They're troubled.
Yeah.
They're the have-nots.
Uh-huh.
Right, have-nots, yeah.
Contented.
This is going to be a group of people that a good image to have is Robin Hood and the Band of Merry Thieves. These are not your up-and-up citizens. These are people who have debts and are running away from debt collectors.
Mm-hmm.
Why are they discontent? Probably because they're not the eldest son. They're the youngest sons who have inherited nothing and have nothing to lose. This is a band of mercenaries that just gather. They're like, oh, David, great military leader, king's after him. Great, we're going to go hide out with him. So just know that, like, this has been slightly polished when it says, like, those who are unhappy with life. This is meaning that these are a group of outlaws, is the uncharitable way to say this. And we will see their outlaw behavior.
Yeah, well, they're outlaws because their definition is they're against the king. And the king is after them, So their definition as being outlaws is that their adversary is Saul. And these are all Saul's adversaries, the ones that are unhappy with his government and so forth, that are gathering around David. So in that sense, they're outlaws.
But it's also, I am very intentionally trying to paint a character description of these folks, because who would be willing to hitch their horse to the guy that is enemy number one of the king?
The king, yeah, right.
Like, the fact that being with David is an improvement says something about their lot in life. Because David is literally being hunted by the king, and some of these guys are going, oh, good person to be around, which means this is not the best group of people.
Yeah, but after all, David is the guy that slew Goliath and saved everybody's property.
Uh-huh.
And like a president of the U.S. once said, there are good people on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yes. So why I point this out is because there's a few episodes that are going to come up that while the writers like to try to depict David in this very innocent, glowing light, this is one where it is still propaganda. It does sound like Saul is not doing himself any favors with painting himself in a good light. He evidently had a descent into madness, or like became a vengeful angry old man. Like, it's hard to deny that with what happens. So Saul, while starting off a decent king, became a not good king. That said, this is still in the area of propaganda where they want to make David look good when David is about to do some not good things.
Thanks.
David is not innocent, and I think that's always important to keep in mind. David is nowhere near innocent in this story. They do try to make him look better than he is, though. So it is David and his band of merry thieves that are going to be trouncing across the countryside, and more than once working for the enemy. So that is the story that we will continue with for next week. I don't have in front of me whether whether we are reading one chapter or two.
23. Just one chapter.
Just one chapter. Okay.
Yeah, you have 23 twice, I think, at least where I look.
Oh yeah, that's
So I
23
assume that
twice.
23, 24, because you skipped 24.
Oh, she skipped 24.
Yeah, that 24 comes after 23.
So
On the
there's
list that I looked at, isn't, I think your notes, for some reason, it's 23
Okay.
twice.
All right.
And, yeah, so it's just, I think it's 24, unless I didn't read it right.
I trust you with that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Alrighty.
Okay.
Well, shall we pray ourselves out for today?
Yes.
Yep.
All right. Let us pray. Gracious and loving God, our story today speaks of a leader who prized loyalty to himself over honoring you. We always hope, God, that we choose leaders that never ask us to make this decision, for it is hard for many people to choose their livelihood and their wellness over their love and dedication to you. But God, help us always to see those choices for what they are and help us choose you. Help us choose love and forgiveness, mercy and justice. Help us work for a world where our leadership is in alignment with the values that we read, the values and morals that we read in Scripture. And so help us speak out when that is not the case. Help us lift up the voices who do point in that direction. And help us always be guided by your love and your justice and your mercy. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
All right.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Have a good
you.
week,
See you
everyone.
next week.